Today we spilled the dirt on dirt. So have you ever gone to one of those big lot garden stores and you just see this never-ending aisle of sacks of soil and just become completely overwhelmed? Like, what is the difference between topsoil or potting mix, or why are there so many different types of manures and compost in bags? Really? Is that a thing? Well, I'm going to go over some of the ideas of the different types of labeling that these soil types have and what they are better used for in your home garden. The first one is native soil, and as the name suggests, this is the native soil you have in your very own backyard. Now, depending on where you live in this big wide world, you may have a very different soil type even from a similar region in your community area. It may be a sandy soil, which has its own set of problems. It may be a clay dense soil, which has its own set of problems. It may be just fill from a construction site, which is just awful, and it's very sad that people do this. But in lots of mass-produced communities, that is what you're working with. I'm sorry. But don't fret. There are ways to fix every soil type regardless of where you live. The key note here, though, is to be aware of what you're working with in the first place. You may be shocked. You may have established old trees that have for years and years left their own natural compost environment in your backyard soil. So you might be starting off with the best stuff yet and not even being aware. You also want to be aware of the pH of your soil, and there's lots of different elements in your native soil that can make your pH be either high or low. This doesn't mean it's a problem. It's only a problem if the plants you plan on planting in your native soil prefer a different pH than what is already existing. But this too can be augmented. Topsoil. Now, this is something that actually occurs naturally in your native soil environment, but you may also find bags of it sold at your neighborhood garden center. And what topsoil is the top layer of your soil. And this is the area of the soil that's going to have the most minerals and nutrients. And the reason being is that this is where new organic matter lays as it starts to decay. So when you think of compost, that's leaves, grass clippings, kitchen scraps, etc., that are starting to decompose. And that's what you're looking for a really rich organic matter amendment. And that's what's occurring naturally on the topsoil layer of your native soil. Now, if you don't have a lot of mature trees that are dropping their leaves naturally for you, or other vegetation that is renewing the soil and this layer, then your topsoil might not be the best to start off with. But as everything, it can be amended. The topsoils you find at garden stores are often what is known as blended soils, and that's where they may cultivate a good layer of topsoil in their facility by adding amendments such as leaves and other organic matter. But then they may also combine with that specific minerals that are going to target problem areas, like different pHs or different levels of drainage for that soil. So be careful, read all the ingredients that are listed on the bag so that way you're better aware of what you're actually using. Some soils are going to be amended with fertilizers, and if you're looking for a more natural organic way of growing as we do here, then some of those fertilizers are going to be perfectly fine, and some of them you may want to steer clear for. So just like anything, be aware of the ingredients and what you're purchasing and go from there. In most cases, the garden center purchased topsoil is best utilized in fixing your terrain. And I don't mean by amending the soil of your terrain, but if you have a spot where there's a divot or a place of erosion and you want to build that up to be more level, or if you're changing the grade of your yard or wherever you're working with, topsoil is going to be a better solution for you because it tends to not cost as much because they haven't put as many amendments in it that may raise the cost. And it's still going to be a good quality soil so that you can plant on that to help limit further erosion, but it's going to be kind of your base soil, if you will. Potting soil is another soil type that you may find at your garden center, and this is also sometimes called as potting mix. They're the same thing, just different names, but what they're used for is when you're going to be potting something in a container. So this soil is specifically designed for container gardening. So they may have amendments in it such as perlite, which is going to help with drainage of the soil, which is really important in a container garden situation, or vermiculite, which is going to aid in moisture retention, which is also important in a container-like environment. Another way and another amendment that they may have in the soil that's going to aid in both of these properties for your container garden is compost. That is a heavily rich organic matter that both aids in drainage due to its irregular particle sizes, where it have really large chunks and smaller chunks, and also because it's still that rich organic, it holds the moisture better as well. Most potting mixes include a mixture of ingredients such as sand, compost, wood, and other organic matter. Plus, many also have other amendments to aid in leading towards particular pH and mineral requirements of specific plants. So as other soils, you want to read and familiarize yourself with the ingredients list of your particular potting soil to make sure you choose the right soil for the plants you want to grow. The final soil type that I want to discuss that you may find at your garden center is known as garden soil. This soil is targeted to be used in a in-ground garden to create those mounds where you plant, or for a raised garden bed. And this is an enriched soil that has the organic matter already added into the mixture, so that way it has as many nutrients in it as possible to improve the growth of your plants. In some cases, it may be so nutrient rich that they actually recommend you doing a 50-50, meaning that you're going to use the native soil and this amended soil in a half and half ratio. So you're going to add half as much of this purchased garden soil and mix it with your native soil to have a nice, loamy, enriched soil for planting. So now that you know the difference of the soil types that you may find at your garden center or in your own backyard, there still is one question left to be answered. And what makes the perfect soil? Well, this is a good question, and one that of course doesn't have a simple answer. There's many different elements of the soil that you want to take into consideration so that you can create the perfect soil for your garden. The first thing you want to think about is the soil's structure. And we talked about this a little bit already in compost and how it is created. It has varying particle sizes, and that's key in a perfect soil environment structure. You want to make sure you have some larger pieces and some smaller pieces, so that way once it's all mixed together, there's going to be little voids and pockets throughout your soil structure. This is going to aid in keeping the moisture where your roots can access it, and within that moisture, the nutrients that your roots can access. Plus, it will aid in drainage, so that way air, which your roots also need, will be available and you won't have a waterlogged plant. I know I keep mentioning organic matter, and perhaps this may be confusing, so let me talk more in depth about organic matter. Organic matter is simply the decomposed remnants of plants and animals. That may sound a little off-putting, but if you think about it, that's exactly what it is. It's leaves, it's wood, it's kitchen scraps from vegetables. You don't really want to put animal proteins as far as kitchen scrap animal proteins into your compost, but I will go further detail into that in my composting video soon to be aired. Of course, my go-to for organic matter is compost, but there are other things that you can use such as worm castings, earthworms, coffee grounds, grass clippings, and leaves. pH, as I've mentioned before, is another important part of the perfect soil, but this varies greatly on what type of plant you intend on planting. For example, blueberries love acidic soil, and so most often you're going to have to amend your soil to get to a proper pH for blueberry plants. Now, most other plants don't like a pH that acidic, so you have to be careful about where you're planting your different plants. That's why garden planning is equally as important as creating a good soil to start off with. Alright, so I'm going to have to cheat and read this list, but to amend your soil for your acid-loving plants, use things such as sphagnum peat moss, elemental sulfur, aluminum sulfate, iron sulfate, acidifying nitrogen, and organic mulches. Here in our garden, we tend to use natural sources for acidifying our soil. So we use peat moss specifically, but pine mulch is also a really great acidifier of soil. The problem with mulches is that it takes time for them to decompose to add their acidifying properties to the soil. So I will often augment the soil with the peat moss by digging it into the dirt, letting it sit for a while, and then once I add my acid-loving plants, I continue to remulch the area with a mulch that's going to re-acidify the soil, and that way I can stabilize the acidity of my soil because it'll leach out a little bit after a time, so if I continue to replenish it, then I don't have to worry about it so much. Our blueberries are producing really well for us this year, but if I keep a closer look at their soil requirements, they're going to be a much healthier plant. If you have soil that's already too acidic for the plants you want to plant, and you're looking for a more alkaline environment, then you can adjust the pH towards alkaline by using limestone or wood ash. Brian loves to enjoy a good fire in our fire pit outdoors, and I save that wood ash for this purpose alone. I want to make sure that I can utilize that wood ash to lower the acidity of my soil without having to purchase something extra. You want to be careful because it is highly alkaline, and it can cause problems if you keep it in a condensed form and add water to it. It will create a lye. This is actually how they used to make soap back in the olden day. So it may be caustic to your hands if you aren't careful with it. But if you mix it thoroughly into your soil and you check the pH on it, you should be perfectly fine, and it's a great way to amend your soil. If there's a soil type or something that you found at your garden store that I didn't cover in this video and you still have questions on it, please leave it in the comments below and I will answer it as the best I can. We didn't cover amendments other than organic matter and compost in this video, but I do have another video where I talk in depth about perlite versus vermiculite. So make sure to check out that video too if you have further questions on those two particular products. I will be continuing on an amendment journey as we talk about things like bone meal and blood meal and what to use those for in your garden. Thank you for watching. Look up! There's another video that you might like equally as well.